Good morning, my honorable students. This morning, I'm with you to discuss one or two things concerning the course we are doing. We have traveled far. I will still have more to do. And our morning discussion will be on concept of learning. Concept of learning. Learning is a construct that lacks a definite definition. Learning is a construct that is having different interpretation, different explanation being given by different scholars and school of thoughts. This morning, we are going to explain the various school of thoughts with their views as to how learning is defined or explained. Then we can bridge an acceptable definition for the term learning. Among all the school of thought that are giving their view concerning learning, we have two prominent ones that are having a center stage in as much as learning is concerned. The two school of thoughts are the behaviorists and the cognitivists. The behaviorists define learning as a relative permanent change in behavioral potentiality as a result of reinforced practice. In their definition, there are three things that they indicated: relative permanent change, behavioral potentiality that result from reinforced practice. It means whatever thing that occurs in the person's life, it doesn't remain there. It's subject to change, subjective in nature, that relative permanent change. And as for the behavioral potentiality, things that we can observe that are within you, but we can observe them when they are exhibited. You stand the chance to exhibit them. That's the potentiality that we are talking about. And the reinforced practice is continuous or repeatedly rewarding such a behavioral potentiality that has been exhibited by the learner. That makes their definition apart or different from any other thing. The same keywords are likely to be found in other definitions, especially the cognitivists that we are about talking about. The cognitivists are saying that learning, with their view, they are saying learning is a process of acquiring knowledge, acquiring relative permanent change in understanding, acquiring a change in attitude, acquiring a change in information that we take, and acquiring the ability, acquiring a skill through experience. And you could see deducing from these definitions I've given, one from the behaviorists, one from the cognitivists. They have one thing in common. One thing in common. What is that thing? Relative permanent change in behavioral potentiality. In as much as we have seen differences as to how they approach learning, they are all targeting one particular thing: how someone changes from today to tomorrow. The way you are behaving today is changing tomorrow. It means they are all having a common ground, despite their differences. Despite that, that is why we say learning has no definite definition. It has no a consensus in terms of definition. And we cannot use one approach as basis to determine that learning has occurred in someone's life. For us to appreciate learning to occur or to be something that we must see in someone, then the two definitions has to be merged for us to understand the concept very well. But the first one that I gave, it was proposed by Kimball 1960, yeah. The second one by Whitrock 1977. So note it. Aside this, what do you think we can infer or we can deduce from these two definitions that we think are common to the two definitions? We have them on our slide. And before we go, we need to let them be displayed. The first one is learning is a process and not a product. Why do we say learning is a process and not a product? It's an ongoing thing. Before we see something, things happen before we saw that thing. That's why we say it is a process. It starts from somewhere, passes through some stages or some process or some procedures before you, the observer, or someone who is outside, is able to take it or to see it and talk about it. So it just doesn't happen at once. It takes a process before it occurs. That's why we say it's not a product. And again, learning occurs through exposure to something. learn occur through exposure to change. It means when one learns, when we say someone has changed a behavior, it means that person was exposed to something outside him. And as a result of that, the person changed from the way he used to be to a different thing. So learning occurs through exposure or experience. And again, learning allows a change in behavior. It means when someone learns, if you are behaving, let's say, a particular way today, and you learn a new thing tomorrow, you are going to behave towards what that new thing that you learned. You are going to show a behavior different from what you exhibited today. That is a change in behavior. And this change in behavior is relatively permanent. Relatively permanent. It means it's not totally permanent. It can change. You can even forget it if you don't engage in that particular task again or experience again. That's a relatively permanent change in behavior we have explained. By giving a difference between the two definitions, with the one from Campbell, who is having the underpinning from the behaviorists, they think learning occurs when we see, when we can describe it, when we can measure it. And their learning is about things that we can observe, which are made up of the overt. The contrary is of the cognitivists, coming from the Witro. They accept the fact that we see things that has happened in terms of learning, but not every learned thing that we can see in terms of understanding, in terms of our knowledge, in terms of ability, in terms of skill. So they pride things that we don't see, but they equally constitute learning. They equally constitute learning. And these are the differences that occur between the behaviorist point of view and that of the cognitivist. Before we move forward, we need to ask, why is it that we find it very difficult to define learning? Why don't we have a definite definition? And why is it that different scholars, different school of thoughts, different movements come with their different views concerning learning? We can understand this by going with the theoretical point of view in terms of the behaviorist and the cognitivist. With the behaviorist orientation, they exclude anything that we cannot see in terms of learning. They exclude anything that we cannot measure in terms of learning. And they exclude anything that we cannot quantify in terms of learning. So whatever that the individual human being exhibits, that cannot be seen by the naked eye, that cannot be measured with any material, or cannot be quantified to be described, then that is not learning. That is their view. So with them, learning is something that we can observe, we can describe, we can quantify, and can talk about, and can be visible. Their opponents are the cognitivists. They say we must not necessarily show things that we have learned. We learn, but sometimes we don't show it, despite the fact they accept the view of the behaviorists. But not all learned materials or not learned behaviors must be exhibited. For example, you learning from someone else's experience. Let's say you have harbored the habit of going to commit a crime, and you have planned going to commit that crime. No one has seen you. But on your way to the crime scene or where you want to execute the crime, you have seen someone who has committed a similar crime and has been beaten mercilessly. You have seen the person being beaten so mercilessly, and you think if you were the one who had committed that crime, the same thing would have been meted to you. So what would you do? You advise yourself that no, crime is not something I'm supposed to engage in. So you have learned, but no one has seen that particular learning thing that you have engaged yourself in, which is vicarious in nature. And that is the cognitivist view. Who understands your understanding? Who sees your understanding? Who even witnesses your skill? Who sees your ability? They are all internalized, but they are part of you. You have learned them. So we're not exhibiting that does not mean that we have not learned. So learning involves both cognitive and then, environment, both thinking about issues and then the environment. So when we tag learning to be the environment, we are going the behaviorist point of view. When we tag learning to be of internalized or the cognitive, we are going to the cognitivist point of view. These two come together to make our learning so wonderful for us to understand it. After understanding what I've just said, what do we think constitutes learning? What do we think make up learning? What do we think does not make up learning? For us to understand that, let us take ourselves through these synonymous ways. How permanent is the relative change in behavior? How permanent is it? It's a question that demands an answer. Why is it that we reference learning to practice or experience? Why is it that we reference learning to practice or experience? And again, do we exclude behavioral changes that are linked to maturation or development in the concept of learning? Do we add them or we exclude them? For us to appreciate learning, learning are not added to maturation. When maturation occurs, after which learning can equally take place. And for one to learn, you have to exhibit something. And for one to learn, then something must occur within your mind. So we cannot attribute learning to any maturation in terms of you going from crawling to walking, babbling to talking. There are things that are bound for us to experience in life, and they cannot constitute learning. And the relative permanent change is subjective. It's subject dependent on the task you have at hand. So we can't say learning is permanent